Hey all! So let's talk about Terraform modules now, and let's dive deep into what they are, how they help the infrastructure and code, and when you can use them, and maybe also why I don't personally like them. But that's a topic for the end of this video. So let's continue. And to start, let's discuss what are they and why they are useful. And basically, you can think of Terraform modules as functions in Terraform code. And yes, I do know that there are functions already, but they're like building blocks on a high level. So you can wrap multiple resources into a single module and call it again and again, like a function in your programming language. And that will do the same thing again and again, as many times as you called it. So pretty much it promotes the reusability of the code, which I pretty much like, and it follows the don't repeat yourself principle, right? So it's something that I highly appreciate and really like about them, at least as they are designed. So the basic structure of a module, you have pretty much the same code as you had. And if we will go to the example that I was playing around with for EC2 provision, basically you can say that the whole thing it's a module, or it can be called as a module, and can be reused later on. Of course, it doesn't really make sense to reuse a module like that, and especially not for the smaller projects, but it is possible. So module will have your configuration file, so as many of those TF files as you want. Then there is a possibility to have a variables files as usual. You, on top of that, can have an output file. So that's a way to communicate with resources outside of the module control. And that would be pretty much it. And you can control how the module would be used. And when to use it, it's basically up to you how you will decide it, but mostly it to improve the maintainability of your code. So if you have a same piece of code that is repeated again and again, and probably not just a single resource, but a group of resources. So imagine if you are developing a group of microservices, and each of the microservices will have their own network configuration, they will have their own database and the server where they will be run. And that thing needs to be the same or exactly almost the same every time. It's a good candidate to create it as a module. Uh, but I would say that it is for bigger organizations and not for smaller ones. And how to write a module? It's extremely simple. So let me show it in a bit later. But you will create a directory, call it however you like it, and that would be the name of your module pretty much. And then you will define the resources as usual in your main dev, and that's just a way to call it by convention. And after that, you will organize the variables and outputs in separate files, or if you really want to, you can just bundle it all together into a single file. But then you will break the readability and maintainability idea of the modules, and someone will not be happy about you later on. Maybe it would be you yourself. After that, you might want to use the modules, and to do that, you need to use a special word module, and then you need to specify where the source of the module. The good thing is that, first of all, the module can be local, so you can just call it from the directory, or alternatively, you can actually call it from the repository, Git repository, and that way it's much better. Um, Now, the last thing to call the module is that you will want to make them reusable, so you don't recreate the same thing again and again. And to do that is to use variables. So you will pass multiple variables the same way as you configure individual resources. You can configure the module with variables. Or if you watched my previous video about the environments, that is pretty much close how I would do it or how I usually do it, and you can use variables that way as well. On top of that, you can, as I mentioned, create output values from the module. So if you need to know the ID of the created resources, for example, and pass them to separate resource or to the module, then you can define the output values and receive them from the module to reuse later on. And finally, module versioning and registry. If you want to maintain those modules, you might want to maintain them in an ordered condition, right? And to do so, you would need to, first of all, keep versions of the module, so you know which version of the module depend on what other resources, or if there are any changes. And on top of that, you might want to maintain the registry of those modules. You can use the HashiCorp Cloud version of it, where you would push the modules into, or alternatively, you can just maintain them as a Git repository and, for example, use tagging for the versions and just maintain them this way. And just for the better management of the dependencies, you would think yourself later on when you know that there are some big changes between different versions of the module, and maybe in one version of it you are using, I don't know, Azure, and then from the version 2.0 you would decide to go to the Google Cloud Platform instead. But it is quite unlikely, let's say so. Um, Now, about another way to use the modules, and it is very common one. I would say it's almost the most common one, and the one that I hate the most is the usage of modules for the deployments. I will briefly discuss it. So you might have seen something like that. So you would wrap the whole application code, infrastructure application code, into a single module, and then you would have different environments as separate folders, and pretty much you cd into a specific folder and run Terraform plan and Terraform apply from that folder. And each of those, they will have their own backend configuration, Terraform configuration, and variable files. And you kind of safe that way. But from my perspective, it actually breaks the dry principle, and that's why I don't like it. That's why I suggest to use the approach that I presented in a previous version video about the different environments and how to maintain it. Even better, you actually can deploy that way not only the same application, but you can maintain multiple versions of the microservice architecture if they are similar to this one. As in the example before, you can have a variable called name of the service and deploy the service separately, and can have the flags, and basically deploy the whole module as a single thing without repeating the code to call the module and calling it module. Uh, I will show it in a minute in an example. So let's jump into the code. We have this. As I said, I created a folder modules, and then inside of them I created an app folder that will be the source for the module, where I moved everything from the my AWS file from before, if you watched the videos, and that everything is just a single resource. So the dry principle is kind of broken here because it doesn't make sense, but let's stick to this. What else we changed is that we provide the instance type and the application name as variables now. So it kind of makes the module configurable. But on the other hand, we don't have anything to output, so the output is missing. And then to call the module itself, I created the folder environments, and then underneath it the dev and prod, where the main dev is pretty much copy pasted, which is finally breaking the dry principle that I mentioned and keep on mentioning again and again. And over here you have the configuration for the Terraform with the provider configuration and the backend configuration, and on top of that we are finally calling the module. You can call the module as you would want to, and then you provide the source for the module and provide the required variables. So the environment, application name, and the instance type are the variables that are defined in a module, and we happily provide what we want to have for each of them. So for the dev, we call the environment dev over here, and the instance type would be the T2 micro. Same actually for prod, but the name of the environment is production. So you hardcode everything in this case and reuse it again and again. So I will say it many times maybe, but my preferred way is described in a video about the different environments and how you can deploy to them using the single folder structure and no modules at all. Hopefully that is clear, so let's jump back to the presentation. Best practices for Terraform modules is the next thing that I wanted to discuss. And the very first one is my personal recommendation. Keep it simple. Modules are great, but they need to be used with care, let's say it that way, because they are quite complex to understand, and when you have multiple versions of different module, it is quite easy to forget yourself and what you are working on. So in my personal experience, once again, usually it is much easier not to use modules at all, and instead just each team pretty much owns their own infrastructure and writes whatever they need. And more often than not, they would need to copy some of the specific solutions from other teams, because quite often, once again, they are not that complicated, and the complexity and the mental burden of reusing modules actually more than what they provide. But if you have a different organization structure and a single team owns all of the infrastructure and is responsible for it, plus you might have some security requirements and so on, then modules might be useful, but be careful when you use them. And as always, you need to aim for the reusability. So to keep the dry principle flourishing, it needs to be easy to maintain, and it needs to be allowed for quick updates. So variables needs to be really clearly structured, and very important is to have a clear naming convention. So it's super obvious what each variable does and what each resource inside of the module, if you work on a module, actually doing, and where it is supposed to be used. And the last but definitely not least is the documentation. You need to provide a very comprehensive documentation to help your users to understand what's that goal of the module, how to use it, and who they can contact to pretty much maintain and answer any questions about those modules. And next, you would be better off if you have a good test coverage of those modules. And I'm not only talking about the Terraform Validate or Terraform Plan, but to use something like Terragrant, for example, and the actual unit testing of Terraform code. But this is a topic for another discussion. With that being said, thank you very much for listening, and you do you as usual. Please use those modules with care and with love. And also, I would like if you would like this video and subscribe for more detailed guides later on. See you.